Hello again, everybody. I'm Roger Hoover. Glad to welcome you back to the Crimson Tide Sports Network, and welcome to this Tuesday edition of Crimson Drive presented by Coca-Cola. Week 3 of the college football season is here. Alabama still ranked number 1 and off to a 2-0 start this season. So let's talk all things Crimson Tide football on this edition of Crimson Drive. We have the smart board that's provided to us by our friends at RJ Young. RJ Young is the official technology solutions provider of Crimson Drive, and they'll help us go through all the headlines, starting with what is coming up on the show for this Tuesday. First of all, we'll go back to Bryant-Denny Stadium and welcome you inside the broadcast booth for the Crimson Tide Sports Network, as we'll have our booth cam highlights coming up first, and then we'll hear from the head coach of the Crimson Tide, Nick Saban, with coach's checklist from his Monday press conference. A little bit of a look back at Mercer and a very important injury update he shared for Alabama, as well as a look ahead to the game against Florida. More on that coming up with our Writers Row interview with Charlie Potter of Bama Online. He's been covering Crimson Tide football for a long time and really good perspective, especially on the play of quarterback Bryce Young so far this season. Then speaking of quarterbacks, everyone wants to talk about Florida's quarterbacks. What's the situation there between Emory Jones, Anthony Richardson, Kyle Crooks of the Gator Sports Network? He'll be along with the other booth interview, providing us a detailed scouting report on the Florida Gators. Speaking of the Crimson Tide football team, we'll take a look at a few headlines for Alabama football. Again, the win against Mercer, 48-14, an impressive home opener for the Crimson Tide. And following the ball game, Alabama announced 6 players of the week. On offense, freshman JoJo Earle, along with Evan Neal. Then on defense, Christian Harris, Kool-Aid McKinstry, who got his first career interception, as well as Drew Sanders, first game that he has been playing in the spot of Christopher Allen as a starter. Looked really sharp, getting a lot of tackles. And also do want to note that on special teams, Jace McClellan, who had a good game as one of Alabama's running backs, he was named Special Teams Player of the Week by the Alabama coaching staff. Also, we learned yesterday that for Week 4, the Southern Miss game time has been set 6:30 p.m. Alabama against Southern Miss at Bryant-Denny Stadium, and our coverage on the radio will start at 3:30 that afternoon with the booth cam you can watch live on the CTSN Facebook page. Other teams in action on the Alabama campus include the Crimson Tide soccer team. It was nice to see them break a 3-game losing streak on Sunday. Had a 2-goal victory against UAB. The 2 goals I mentioned here are goals by Tana Sanchez-Corretto, Ashlyn Sarepka, 50th minute, 51st minute. So 2 goals in a flash really for the Crimson Tide. It was impressive to see that on Sunday night as McKinley Crone was in between the posts as the goalkeeper for the entire match, and she collected a shutout. Very good work by McKinley Crone. And now the soccer team with Wes Hart is gearing up for Thursday's SEC opener as the Crimson Tide will take on Ole Miss, 2 teams that are kind of picked in a similar spot in the middle of the conference in the preseason standings. So this will be a good indicator of where Alabama can go during conference play coming up on Thursday. And a few more headlines across Alabama athletics. The volleyball team had a tough weekend in Texas, losing to Texas State and Miami at the Bobcat Invitational in San Marcos, Texas. But they have a chance to kind of get back in gear coming up at home this weekend, as they'll be hosting the Bama Bash inside Foster Auditorium. So if you're in the mood for some volleyball, we have plenty of matches coming up this weekend for the Crimson Tide. Then men's and women's golf both in action. The men's team had a 10th overall finish at the Maui Gym Intercollegiate, and then women's golf is playing right now. They're starting their season at the Annika Intercollegiate. So great to have both the men's golf team and the women's golf team in action already as part of this busy sports calendar here on the Alabama campus. Again, coming up on the show today, we have the Mercer game booth highlights, coach's checklist, the writer's interview with Charlie Potter, and then Kyle Crooks of the Florida Gators will be along last. But first, we want to go back to the Mercer game. Alabama picked up the win 48-14. Let's take you inside the broadcast booth for our booth cam highlights. And again, you'll get to listen back to all the great moments from Alabama against Mercer.
Welcome back, everybody. Eli Gold, John Parker Wilson, Rashad Johnson, Chris Stewart, our engineer, producer, Tom Stipe, and our spotter, Butch Owens. We welcome you to Bryant-Denny Stadium on a beautiful day for the Tide and the Mercer Bears. Obviously, this being the first game of the season, the field, at home game of the season, the field is in immaculate condition. The first punt by Turk was a 48-yarder. This one is blocked by Alabama. It's picked up on the near sideline, down the right side, and taking it in for a touchdown. Alabama with a great job blocking the punt. And then Jace McClellan comes across and takes it down the right sideline. But a Chris Braswell block of the punt. He got in there in a hurry, set up Jace McClellan to take it in for the touchdown. Here now the snap. Give to Robinson. Finds running room over the left side. He is in. Touchdown, Alabama. Brian Robinson getting the running room, and he made it work. And Bama has just scored from the Chick-fil-A red zone. Holden wide to the right side. Everybody in tight. Bryce waves his hands. Signals it. Gets the snap. Loads up, looks, finds Holden left side. Here's Slade Bolden down the left sideline. He is in. Touchdown, Alabama. Slade Bolden, they signaled to him when Bryce started waving his hands, and a quick release left side, and Slade picks up the touchdown, and Bama's on top 20-0. Two tight ends, Latu and Billingsley. Tommy Brown in on the right side of the line. Handoff left side. Breaking a tackle. Stiff-arming a man. Jace takes it in. Touchdown, Alabama. On a 4th and 1 from the 4-yard line, the Crimson Tide make that last play look easy. So now a 31-yard field goal try by Will Reichard. Neeland Hibbett will snap it, and Paul Tyson holds it. It's just off the far hash mark. Low snap, picked up nicely, placed down, and the kick is up. And the kick is good. So a 31-yard field goal by Will Reichard. Bryce claps his hands. Waits for the snap. Gets it. Holds on. The out route open is Jamison Williams. Touchdown, Alabama. 3 yards into the end zone. He was there. He was open, and a strike by Bryce Young. Here's a throw across the middle. Jace McClellan. He'll make it. He'll spin off the defender and carry it into the end zone. Touchdown, Alabama. 21 yards. And that's going to do it as the clock is going to wind its way down. Coaches Nick Saban and Drew Cronick will meet out at midfield. Smiles from both men. They exchange a quick word, and that's going to do it.
Alabama 48, Mercer 14. The top-ranked Crimson Tide now a perfect 2-0 on the season. Great to relive all the great moments we saw on Saturday inside Bryant-Denny Stadium with the booth cam highlights. And again, we'll have the booth cam up and running for every Alabama football game coming up this season. So make sure you just log on right back here to the Crimson Tide Sports Network Facebook page. On game days, our booth cam goes live 3 hours prior to kickoff, right as we come on the radio for Alabama football. So everyone's excited about the Mercer win. The Crimson Tide off to a 2-0 start, but still a lot ahead for this football team, starting with this week's opponent, the Florida Gators, in the SEC opener. And on Monday, it was head coach Nick Saban meeting with the media. Now we'll play you a few of the most important points that he had from Monday with Coach's Checklist from Coach Saban on Monday.
Well, I think in reviewing the last game, I think there's a lot to learn from the last game. I think the number one thing is, when we did things correctly, when we executed fundamentally, when we played with good discipline, we had really good success. And that was a little bit too inconsistent in terms of us being able to stack positive performance, play in and play out, in the game. Made a couple of mistakes on defense and gave a couple big plays up that led to their scores. Offensively, we made a lot of good plays, but we also had, too many plays that, were not executed exactly like we wanted, and the result was not always positive. I thought we made some plays in the kicking game, which, blocking a punt, scoring a touchdown, had some positive returns, and especially in punt returns. So there's a lot of good things, in the game, but I think consistency and performance is really what we need to work on in terms of maintaining intensity, staying focused, playing with more discipline, eliminating penalties and poor, full-speed decisions that, are resulting, in penalties. But from an injury standpoint, Will Anderson has been very encouraging. I'd probably take a day off today, is kind of day to day, but we feel a little more encouraged than maybe after the game. So we'll just see how he progresses through the course of the week. Dan Mullen has done an outstanding job wherever he's been the coach. He did a great job at Mississippi State. Obviously, they won the SEC East last year. Excellent coach, does a great job at utilizing the personnel that he has. Has some really talented guys on offense, really good running backs. Both quarterbacks using a 2-quarterback system are very capable passers, as well as making plays with their feet, whether it's quarterback runs, play action passes, whatever. And they have, they just got good players. Our offensive line is, improved and, better this year, playing better in my opinion. That's why they're like second in the nation in rushing, which is going to be a real challenge for us. And then not allowing big plays when you're trying to stop the run. Defensively, Todd always presents challenges. He's a really good defensive coordinator. They've got good players. They play hard. They play together. So we're going to have to do a good job of executing, offensively as well. They've always got great team speed, so their special teams are good. They have good specialists. I think their punter is one of the top guys in the country. So all around, this is a very good team. It'll be a very challenging game for us. And, so we need to have great focus this week and great preparation.
Coach's checklist from head coach Nick Saban on Monday, and he will be having his next press conference coming up on Wednesday night following Alabama's practice, and we'll have our next edition of Coach's Checklist coming up on Thursday's edition of Crimson Drive, presented by Coca-Cola at 2 p.m. One of the people that's always at a Nick Saban press conference or a player press conference, really anything related to Alabama football, Charlie Potter covers it for Bama Online, and it was great to catch up with him this week as part of our Writers Row feature, as we always get the perspective of writers that cover Alabama on a day-in, day-out basis, and Charlie Potter is this week's guest. Charlie, so far, 2 games in for this Alabama football team. What have we learned about Nick Saban's team in 2021?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot different. Last year's team, obviously with the COVID year, I think the offense was just full of veteran players. We've seen the offense do some good things. I think Bryce Young's looked really comfortable and poised in the pocket, but there's a lot of new faces on that side of the ball. And I think they're starting to come into their own, though. I think it's taken some time for those guys to get some chemistry and gel. But defensively, they've looked really good. I don't think Coach Saban is very pleased with the second half performance in either game, but I think the defense has come out strong, and when they're at full tilt and full health, they've looked really dominant. So it's a young team. It's one that I think is still coming together, but they've had 2 big wins and going into their first road trip of the season. So I think we'll learn a little bit more this weekend in Gainesville.
When you watch Alabama's offense, have there been any moments where you go, okay, that's something that Coach O'Brien has brought to Tuscaloosa, or is it still pretty similar to what we've seen the last few years?
Yeah, I think the first 2 weeks have been pretty vanilla, and that's to be expected. I mean, usually this FCS game is later in the year, so I don't think they're going to just show their full hand going against Mercer, especially with games against Florida, Ole Miss, Texas A&M on the horizon. So it's been very vanilla. So I guess it's been, nothing too surprising. I will say, though, you can tell they're comfortable with Bryce Young, and you can tell that Bill O'Brien's comfortable with him, because I believe it was the first play of the Miami game, the season opener. It was a deep shot down the field to Jameson Williams. So the trust is obviously there with the young quarterback. And, I think that's something that Bill O'Brien has showed throughout his career is, his obviously relationships with the quarterback, but the trust in them to do what they can as well. So no real surprises. They've leaned on the running game a little bit, but the passing game hasn't been pushed to the backside. So it's been pretty balanced.
What's your assessment so far of Bryce Young? Not just what we've seen on the field, but it seems like off the field as well. He talks so much about leadership, and he really is trying to step up, it seems like.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard from him, I think, 3 times now since the preseason, and poise is a word that's often used with him, and that's accurate. Whether it's over these Zoom calls with us, on a weekly basis, or on the field, on the sideline, you can tell he's comfortable in his own skin, and I think that's translated to him just being comfortable in the field and in the pocket. He's shifty, he's elusive back there, but you can tell that he's quickly making decisions and making accurate ones. And I think he's almost at 71% completion percentage right now through 2 games. And they've asked him to do a lot, and he's answered the bell. So I think that poise and that comfortability that he's shown through the first 2 games are going to be really advantageous for him, going on the road to Gainesville, because it's going to be, it's not talked about enough, but this is the first really hostile environment that he's going to experience, because last year they had limited capacity crowds and everything. So I think everything that we've just talked about with Bryce is going to benefit him going on the road and facing that crowd at the Swamp.
What stands out to you the most about Alabama's offensive line through 2 games? That was a group we talked a lot about, it seemed like, in the preseason, a lot of mixing and matching, a lot of injuries, but what have you seen in the last 2 games?
Yeah, I mean, for me, that was the biggest question going into the season. That probably shifted a little bit over the course of the summer, but just with the continuity they weren't able to establish because guys weren't available all the time in the preseason. But I think that group's coming along. They moved Chris Owens from center to right tackle, and then that allows you to maybe have that 6th offensive lineman as Kendall Randolph as that kind of pseudo tight end, wearing number 85, who was penciled in maybe as the starter at right tackle. So it's been kind of a few moving parts and things like that, but I think it's coming together. They're going to face their biggest test of the season coming up against Florida in their pass rush, but I think Darian Dalcourt at center, he's getting more and more comfortable. We saw a couple of errant snaps in the first game, but he's calmed down a little. I think he and Bryce have a good rapport and chemistry there. And the other guys are pretty proven. Evan Neal's played a ton of football at Alabama. Emil Ekiyor is going into his 2nd year as a starter, and I haven't heard much about Javian Cohen, but that's usually a good thing for an offensive lineman. So I think it's coming together. Again, though, going on the road, first SEC game is going to be a test for everybody, but I think that's really true for the offensive line.
We mentioned before the defense is a real strength for this team, and one of the biggest leaders is Will Anderson Jr., who at times has been unblockable, had to leave the Mercer game with injury. Coach Saban seemed a little more encouraged when he spoke to the media on Monday. Just as things stands on this Tuesday, what's the severity of this injury for Will Anderson Jr.?
Yeah, I mean, I know Alabama fans have been holding their breath for that one, but there wasn't a really significant update after the game. But like you said, Coach Saban was very encouraged on Monday when he talked to us. And I think that's good, because he was able to get off the field under his own power when he walked to the locker room, albeit flanked by what looked like every member of Alabama's training staff. He didn't really show any kind of limp. So I think they're being cautious with him. He didn't practice on Monday, and that was to be expected. We'll hear from Coach Saban on Wednesday a couple of times via the SEC teleconference, and then he'll have a post-practice press conference with us, and I'm sure he'll have updates throughout the week. But the encouraging part is the word encouraging that Nick Saban used with him, because he said it's looking more encouraging from what he initially thought after the game, which is a big deal, because through the first 2 games, I think an argument could be made that Will Anderson is like one of the best players in college football, just because he's unblockable, like you said. And with losing Chris Allen already, you need that other guy on the other side to run that pass rush. So they need him on the field as much as they can.
Of course, the narrative throughout the years, and going back to Johnny Manziel or Bo Wallace, anybody you want to look at that's beaten Alabama, the Crimson Tide have a tough time against a mobile quarterback. And really with Florida, you have 2 guys that can move kind of regardless of what the injury situation is for Anthony Richardson. Just when you look at Alabama's defense against Dan Mullen's offense, what stands out to you the most?
Yeah, I mean, just looking at some of the stats going into this game, it's crazy how different Florida is on the offensive side of the ball, because last year with Kyle Trask and Kadarius Toney, and of course Kyle Pitts, the talented tight end, it was just full on aerial attack. And Alabama fans saw that in the SEC championship game, but they've really relied on the run game and really relied on the dual threat ability of both their quarterbacks, Emory Jones and of course Anthony Richardson, like you said. So it's a different offense. I do think though that whole, I guess, narrative that Alabama struggles with the mobile quarterbacks, sometimes there can be holes poked in that. But I think facing a guy like De'Aaron King in the first game against Miami, even though he was coming off that ACL injury, that's good prep for this. Mercer had an offense where they, I think, were coming off nearly 600 yards rushing in their season opener, and and they throw so many looks at you just with their motions and movement. I think that's good preparation for Florida. Obviously, Florida's not going to run a wishbone like offense or a wing tee or anything like that, but just the way that they run the football and rely on their quarterback's legs, because I believe both quarterbacks are their leading rushers going into this game. I think that's good prep. And, I think teams that just want to rely on the run against Alabama with the way they rotate defensive linemen in there, and if Will Anderson's healthy and the way Drew Sanders played last week, that kind of fits into Alabama's strength a little bit.
Charlie Potter covers Alabama for Bama Online. And I know, Charlie, last year fans really enjoyed the Lucky Penny story that you shared about Coach Saban and his daughter, Kristen. Any off the field stories you've been working on or any big projects you have coming up for Bama Online?
Nothing huge this week. It's kind of tough whenever you have to make a long road trip to Gainesville. Last week, I kind of, to make up for that, I did kind of a double dip with, talking to Jeremy Giselle and Jeff Allen about Trey Sanders' recovery, which that's just an unbelievable story. Coming off of that, tragic. I guess it wasn't that tragic, but the traumatic is a better word for it. Car accident last year, and then Drew Sanders stepping into his starting role. I talked to his high school defensive coordinator, and that guy has a huge man crush on Drew Sanders. So those are some of the things. There'll be more, coming down the pipe throughout the season. But it's good to get back on the road. It's a long haul to Gainesville, but looking forward to actually getting to the Swamp for my first game there.
Yeah, it's been 10 years since Alabama's been there, so we're glad that's coming up for you. And of course, you're not alone at Bama Online. What else can you tell us about the great coverage you guys provide?
Oh yeah, I mean, I know I do a lot. I'm on the Zoom calls and everything. We have a great staff though. Kurt McNair has been doing this forever, dating back to Coach Bryant's tenure. He knows more about Alabama football than I ever will. Same goes for Travis Rye, our senior analyst, and then recruiting is a big part of obviously Bama Online and 24/7 Sports, and Hank South and Tim Watts do a good job there. So anything, everything, we got you covered at BOL.
Sounds good. Well, Charlie, thank you so much for joining us. Safe travels to Gainesville.
All right, man. Thanks for having me.
Really enjoyed that conversation with Charlie Potter. Again, check out his reports on Bama Online, a part of the 24/7 Sports Network. A lot of great coverage of the Alabama Crimson Tide. We talked a little bit about the Florida Gators in that interview with Charlie, but now it's time for a really detailed scouting report on the Florida Gators, as it's time for the other booth, visiting with a member of the broadcast team for Florida. And this week's guest is Kyle Crooks of the Gator Sports Network from Learfield. I think you'll enjoy hearing more about Florida, especially the quarterbacks. We have a lot of questions about whether we're going to see Emory Jones, maybe Anthony Richardson on Saturday, and Kyle Crooks with some great insights on the Florida Gators here. Kyle, what's going on down in Gainesville as the Gators make preparations for Alabama's first visit in 10 years?
Yes, exciting. Sold out. First time we've had a full sellout in a couple of years. Obviously, last year not able to have crowds, but the anticipation is growing. This is a game that you have circled on your calendar for weeks. So for these fans, for everybody around, really listening to sports radio, just driving around here in Gainesville, and to hear the fans and how pumped up they are for this game. This is something that as soon as it gets put on the schedule, you're thinking about Alabama coming to the Swamp. And, I've had people text me for tickets, and look, I don't have that kind of pull around here, but it's exciting to have Alabama here in the Swamp, and excited for this game.
2 games in for the Florida Gators, a win against Florida Atlantic as well as South Florida. What did you like most about Florida's performances in those games?
Yeah, I think offensively they've looked good. I think they've been able to establish a bunch of different runners, whether it's been Malik Davis, whether it's been Damian Pierce, Emory Jones as well has looked good in flashes. I think you look at him and his performance against South Florida, looked good in the first half, but makes a couple of really bad mistakes in the second half of this game against South Florida. They get outscored by 10 points in the second half of that game. Don't really finish it well. Anthony Richardson has been the big highlight. Is he going to play in this game? I don't know the answer to that. Dan Mullen has come out and said that that right hamstring is something that they're gonna work him into practice during the week to make sure that he's going to be able to go. Will he be 100%? Probably not. So you probably will see more Emory Jones this week. You're moving closer to what is eventually going to become a 50-50 split between Richardson and Jones. But obviously the big conversation has been around the quarterbacks. Who is going to see a lot of the reps in this game? How does Florida beat Alabama? That's something that I don't think Florida fans know the answer to, which is rely on your strengths, run the football, and hopefully you have mistake-free football, which through the first 2 games, Roger, they have not been able to do. They've had, Jones has thrown 4 picks through the first 2 games, so they have to find a way to stay ahead of the chains, have good down and distance, and they cannot turn the football over.
So with Emory Jones, as we talk about the Florida quarterbacks, what does he do best when he's got this offense rolling? What are the Gators doing?
Yeah, I mean, Emory Jones, for him, what he does best is he's a runner. Last year he was somebody he kind of ran violently. He ran for 6-8 yards a pop between the tackles. This year, because he is now the full-time guy, you're looking at him a different way, where I think he's playing the position a little bit of a different way. Is he an elite passer in this league? I don't know the answer to that question quite yet. I don't think he's had enough reps. Decision making is still something that is questionable for Emory Jones at times. The 2 interceptions he threw against South Florida, those were 2 really bad mistakes, and Coach Mullen let him hear it on the sideline. For Emory Jones, I think it's a confidence thing right now for him. Is you get named the starter, you sit 3 years behind Felipe Franks, then behind Kyle Trask. You're finally the guy. This is supposed to be your team. And then all of a sudden it's your team, and then the fans are clamoring for somebody else. So confidence issue, I think, for Emory Jones. What he does well is he runs the football. He gets this team into a rhythm. He's played in big games, Roger. He's played in Florida, Georgia. He played in the SEC championship. He's played in big series in his time here. He has not had the consistent reps that you'd want from a starting quarterback leading into this season. So for Emory Jones, what he hasn't done well is protect the football. What he does well is run the football, and they're still looking to see if he can be a precision passer. Jury's still out on that.
And then for Anthony Richardson, again, the hamstring issue that happened near the end of the USF game released his time in the game. If there was no injury again, where would the quarterback competition stand going into the Alabama matchup?
I think it would still be Emory would be your starter. I think everybody gets locked up in this idea of who is your starter. It's who's playing in crunch time. And Dan Mullen says this all the time. You can look at our 2 deep and see who the starter is, but who's playing in the final series of the game? Who's playing when there's 4 minutes left? Who's playing in the fourth quarter? You saw Anthony Richardson as early as the 3rd drive against South Florida. I think it would be even closer. I think you'd see Richardson a little bit more this week if he was 100% healthy. I think it's only a matter of time before maybe Anthony Richardson becomes the starter. It's possible. Emory Jones will see snaps in every single game. Now, if it's something in the locker room where Dan Mullen feels like it's a better fit to have Anthony Richardson as the starter, he will do that. And Coach Mullen said after the game against South Florida that he hasn't really shown the 2 quarterback offense all the way yet. So he's been kind of hinting at the fact that they have not really run a large percentage of the looks that they might run with these 2 quarterbacks. But all things considered, if Anthony Richardson is healthy coming into this game, he is a guy who gives them a chance to beat Alabama. I think the feeling around Gator Nation right now is without Anthony Richardson, his big playability, he's had comps to Cam Newton, his ability to run. And, Roger, he had 3 passes, all completions, threw for over 100 yards against South Florida, ran for over 100 yards. He's rushed for over 100 yards in back-to-back games. His first play was a 75-yard touchdown pass. He's done every single thing that a fan base would have their mouth water over. But I also think it's important that Emory Jones has more knowledge of the offense, more knowledge of being able to read defenses. So I think they play off of each other really well. And I still think at this point in the season, and we're only in the 3rd week, you're still going to see, if he's healthy, which I don't think will be the case with that hamstring, I think you're still seeing a 60-40 split where Emory has more snaps than Anthony.
Defensively, looking at the Florida Gators, who are some of the playmakers that can try and slow down this high-powered Alabama offense, especially that passing attack?
Yeah, I think the key thing, Roger, is getting after the quarterback, and that starts with Zach Carter, who had 3 sacks in the opener against Florida Atlantic. He was the SEC Defensive Player of the Week. Florida, their strength is up front, which hasn't been the case in the past. They've added a couple of transfers to Quan Newkirk up front, Antonio Valentino, Tyrone Truesdale, all three transfers. Dan Mullen said after the SEC championship game, the biggest difference between these two teams were at the line of scrimmage. The size of the offensive and defensive line between these two teams was the big difference. I think the biggest difference with Florida's defense this year is the size they have up front, their ability to control the line of scrimmage a little bit more. Now, we'll see as you move from the FAUs and the USFs how well they control the line of scrimmage against Alabama. But can they get that edge pass rush? The two key guys, Zach Carter off the edge, along with Brenton Cox, who's a transfer from Georgia on the back end. They have a question mark at that second corner. Avery Helm, Jason Marshall Jr., they have not played well at that second corner spot, at least through 2 games, both young guys. Avery Helm was forced to be the starter after Jaden Hill went down in preseason camp with a torn ACL. Kyer Elam, he is the key to that secondary. Lockdown corner, preseason All-American. I would not expect for Alabama to look much in his direction. He's a guy with a lot of experience and a guy who you can't even really talk to him. He's so locked in. He doesn't really talk to the media much. Kyer Elam, he's an intense guy. I think the biggest issue right now for this Florida defense is at that other corner position and also at the middle linebacker position. Ventrell Miller, who was the team's leader in tackles last year, he is the captain of this defense. He was nicked up against South Florida. So the big question mark is, will he be ready to go? There's a couple of key injuries, one being Anthony Richardson on the offensive side, Ventrell Miller on the defensive side. So with that, they might have to move a few guys, shuffle a few guys around in that linebacking core.
Then how about on special teams? Any dynamic playmakers we should keep our eye on?
Yeah, for Florida, they've had Malik Davis returning kicks. I think that's one of the biggest transitions for Florida this year is you had a first-round draft pick and one of the more explosive returners in Kadarius Toney, who was a first-round draft pick to the New York Giants. He goes, so now you enter in a guy in Malik Davis, Kyer Elam, Xavier Henderson are all guys that can rotate and punt returns and kick returns. There have not been many explosive plays yet on special teams. You're replacing such a big guy on that side of it. In terms of the kicking game, Roger, you're also replacing an automatic guy in Evan McPherson, who won a game for the Bengals yesterday in overtime. You replace him with a guy in Chris Howard, who saw limited action last year when McPherson was out with COVID protocols against Missouri. So if the game does come down to a point where you're asking for your kicker to have a big play late in the game, that's a transitional point for Florida this year, a new kicker. They're hoping Chris Howard can be a reliable guy. In terms of explosive returners, though, you look at a guy like Xavier Henderson and Malik Davis in the punt and kick return, respectively. The Gators might need that third act to try and pull out an upset here at home. If it's a stalemate on offense and defense, if they can get that wild card that is special teams to work in their favor, then the Gators would have a lot of help in that regard.
Saturday, it's Alabama against Florida. Kyle, thank you for joining us to give us some thoughts on the Florida Gators as we get ready for a really anticipated SEC opener for both Alabama and Florida. Thanks for your time, and I look forward to your great broadcast coming up on Saturday.
All right. Thanks, Roger. Appreciate you having me.
Kyle Crooks of the Gator Sports Network with a really great breakdown on all things Florida, especially looking at those quarterbacks. What are we going to see on Saturday? Emory Jones kind of sounds like a little more of him than possibly Anthony Richardson, dynamic playmaker, but still have a long way to go until Saturday. Still a lot of time for that hamstring to recover, so we still have a lot to be determined as we get ready for Alabama against Florida. Coming up on Crimson Drive on Thursday, yes, we'll be back with this show coming up on Thursday afternoon at 2 p.m. Central, as we'll be joined, first of all, by Brad Nessler of CBS Sports. He's going to be calling Alabama against Florida on CBS, along with Gary Danielson and Jamie Erdahl. So we're excited to pick Brad's brain as he's gearing up for his first SEC game of the year. We'll have the voice of the Crimson Tide, Eli Gold, along with a Hey Coach preview, setting the stage for what's coming up on Thursday night at Baumhauer's Victory Grill in Tuscaloosa at 6:30. It will be Hey Coach and the Nick Saban Show, so a great breakdown of that coming up from Eli, as well as a visit with one of our Alabama legends, legends breaking down some Alabama and Florida history, a lot of history between these schools, especially in SEC championship games. So keep an eye out for that coming up on Thursday. We'll also have Coach Saban's comments as well from his Wednesday press conference. Thanks to Charlie Potter, Kyle Crooks for joining us, as well as our crack producer, Ethan Carabin, for doing a fine job, even as I punch the table. Ethan keeping the show going for us. Really appreciate his hard work, and thanks to all of you for watching this edition of Crimson Drive presented by Coca-Cola. We'll see you right back here on Thursday at 2 p.m. for our next edition of Crimson Drive. Roll Tide, everyone.